I'm Andrew Harding. I'm the Director of the Centre for Asia Pacific Initiatives. It's my pleasure to all the way from today. And so we're very, very delighted to have Gary with us. He's a very eminent and experienced researcher and writer and teacher in international business, with great expertise on Asia as well. So, Gary, thank you very much for coming, and we await you. Welcome to Say Great.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I know that you come, most of you, from a variety of domains, and so I'm going to give obviously a presentation on my business research, and I hope I'll try to make it as interesting to you as I can. So I want to talk today about really my historical research domain, the area probably where I have my main reputation, which is in the contemporary global enterprise and the resources and capabilities that are important for the success of such companies doing international business. And when I talk about contemporary global enterprises, I'm really talking about small and medium-sized enterprises. And these are companies defined in Canada and the US as firms with 500 or fewer employees. And they constitute the vast majority of companies really in the world, as you can imagine. And the reason I call them contemporary global enterprises is because historically international business was dominated by large multinational corporations. You know, if you think about sort of the Fortune 500 companies, the largest companies in the world, historically dominated international business. And the reason they were the dominant players is because historically international business was an expensive undertaking. And so it really required a lot of sort of financial and other tangible resources in order to do it. But we know that from OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, data that about 30% of manufacturing small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, in the advanced economies are active in large measure in international business. There's a couple of scholars in international business who are well known, Obiad and McDougall, and the flagship journal in international business is called the Journal of International Business Studies, and they give out a decade award about every year at the annual conference, and these folks won the 2004 Decade Award for their seminal work on basically international small and medium-sized enterprises. So the point is that it started this field, the notion of smaller companies, young companies doing international business, is a relatively new trend and has started to gain sort of traction in the scholarly world, in academic journals and so forth. And indeed, in the main academic organization for scholars working in international business, the Academy of International Business, just about 2 years ago, it was the first time they started having a track on international SMEs and the conjoint field international entrepreneurship. And I was fortunate enough to be the track chair the first 2 years for this new track. Now, the interesting thing about SMEs in international business research is that first of all, international business is, as you might imagine, relatively more complex, relatively more, in a sense, resource-intensive, costly than domestic business, just by its very nature. It's more complicated to do business in foreign markets, in foreign countries, than it is to do business in the home country. And simultaneously, SMEs are, perhaps their number one characteristic is by definition, they are smaller companies with relatively limited financial and tangible resources. And so it's very interesting to investigate these companies and this trend of SME internationalization, because there's a tension between the limited resource base of the firm and their ability to function in international markets, oftentimes very complex international markets. I should also mention that historically, the international business literature has long emphasized, almost exclusively, the large multinational corporation, large companies that we're familiar with, the global Fortune 500 type companies, as sort of the main unit of analysis. And so there hasn't been a lot of literature and a lot of research historically on this phenomenon. Now, I am here at UVic to, in conjunction with the Center for Asia-Pacific Initiatives chair in Japan. And I have a strong background in Japan, and so I want to try to cast my presentation today in the context of Japan and small and medium-sized firms in Japan. And so let me give you a little bit of background on Japan today. We can look at some statistics here to give you a sense of circumstances in Japan. One thing on the left here, you see the exchange rate of the Canadian dollar to the Japanese yen over the last 5 years. And you can see that over that period of time, the yen is actually strengthening, becoming relatively more expensive to Canadians. And the implication of that is that it's harder for it's harder for Japanese companies, in a sense, to export their products to Canada and to other countries as a function of their strengthening currency. In addition to that, we also know that the Japanese economy has been in a state of sort of recession or stagnation for about the last two decades. And so that is putting additional pressure on the country. And this is also complicated by the fact that the ratio of government debt in Japan to gross domestic product has been rising over time as the Japanese government has tried to stimulate the economy and undertaken various initiatives. And unfortunately, those initiatives have not had the intended effect of really drawing the economy out of this kind of stagnation. And then, to top everything else off, we have this crisis this year in March, the earthquake and tsunami, and resulting meltdown of nuclear reactors in Japan, which have had various consequences for the country. Now, in terms of small and medium enterprises in Japan, they constitute about 99% of all companies and provide 3/4 of all jobs. So these are very important companies. And they have a direct or indirect connection with, as being suppliers or vendors to traditional large companies that have typically dominated the Japanese economy over time. So they play a very important role in creating jobs and creating new industries. Smaller firms tend to be more innovative. They are also increasingly critical to the international activities of the Japanese economy. Yes?
Of those 60%, would a lot of those be the Keiretsu firms that are tied so closely?
Would they be the what? The
Keiretsu.
Keiretsu firm? Yes, they would be, and part of the Japanese Keiretsu in large part. That system has broken down a little bit over time, but basically still is. Okay, so another thing to know is that the Japanese economy is different from the Canadian economy in terms of the structure of the corporate, the private sector, and the U.S. economy. The Japanese economy, large companies have tended over time to really dominate not only the domestic economy, but also international business. And so we know that Japanese SMEs, despite their massive numbers in the country, tend to be much less involved in international business than the large corporations in Japan. And you might say that Japanese SMEs are a little bit timid. Partly it's a function of their sort of traditional resource base of financial and tangible resources to expand abroad. But also, in many cases, it's because managers in those firms feel that they lack a sufficient know-how for international business. And there's a perception, I think quite natural, that there's a great deal of risk and uncertainty in doing international business. And so Japanese SMEs have a very important role to play in the economy, but simultaneously they need help. And we need to be able to understand factors better that engender success, superior performance among companies, SMEs doing international business. Also, other trends in the Japanese economy, the Japanese economy, the Japanese marketplace is tending to shrink gradually over time due to falling birth rates. Japan demographically has just about the most elderly population in the world, and there's increasing competition coming into the marketplace from abroad as well. So there is unfortunately, instead of a kind of a growing, vibrant marketplace, you actually have relatively more of a shrinking tendency in Japan, which is putting more pressure on companies to look internationally for their success. Now, I have investigated SMEs in Japan extensively. For example, through the Keikoku Data Bank in Tokyo, which is sort of the Japan equivalent of Dun & Bradstreet, and various outlets such as the Nihon Keizai Shimbun, which is sort of like the Financial Times or Wall Street Journal of Japan, have written extensively about international small and medium enterprises. We have some examples here. For example, GeoSearch is one of these small firms in Japan that was founded on a particular technology. They developed a very sophisticated technology to perform a very useful function, which is detecting unexploded landmines. Unfortunately, there's a lot of unexploded landmines in various locations around the world. So they've been able, given that their market is inherently international, they've been able to internationalize early and successfully in their after their founding. And we have some other examples of these as well. Now, a special category of international SME is what we call the born global firm. And these are companies that start doing international business from or near their founding. We can actually look at a little graphic here that shows the conventional pattern of companies, these kind of traditional large multinational corporations, particularly in Canada and the United States, where we have relatively large domestic markets. Companies historically would operate in the domestic market for decades, really several decades, and then gradually start to get into international business. But we know with the born global firm that given new developments in given emergent developments of the last couple of decades, we live in a business environment today where it's much easier for companies to start doing international business right from their founding, to see the world as their marketplace at or near the beginning of the firm. And so we, in fact, have a lot of companies today that exhibit this kind of pattern, where they start doing international business and generate a large proportion of their sales internationally at a very early stage in the firm's evolution. Also, we know that these firms are emerging in large numbers worldwide. So we really live in a different world today. 40 years ago, international business was really the domain of large companies that had the wherewithal to be active internationally. But today, really, there's no limits. Any firm of any size, of any resource base, of any age, can be active in the world economy. And so in a sense, it's a very exciting time. In fact, we can look at another graphic here that shows, that compares growth rates of world exports relative to world GDP over the last 40 years. And we see that really, starting in the 1990s, we started to see the growth rate in world exports diverging quite a lot from that of world GDP, and the gap growing bigger and bigger, which is a reflection of the fact that young, smaller companies in particular, which tend to emphasize exporting as their main international entry mode, are much more active in international business. Now, the two major factors, I believe, that are responsible or very supportive of companies, born globals and SMEs being active participants in international business are this kind of general trend that we call globalization, meaning it means various things to various people, but it means the emergence of infrastructures and around the world that are conducive, or that sort of standardize the ability of companies to do business, and the decline of barriers to trade and investment that has occurred over the last 50, 60 years, not least of which through the GATT and the World Trade Organization, and the emergence of China and the former Soviet Union and India as major players in major markets in the world economy, et cetera, et cetera. All of these trends have contributed to the ability of small companies to do international business. We also know that advanced technologies have played a major role. Things like the internet, information technology in general, the ability to today make an international phone call essentially for free, whereas not so many years ago when I was an export manager at a company in Seattle 20 years ago, and it would cost $1 or $2 a minute to call Japan or call Europe or someplace. Today you can do it for free. And the internet, of course, has played a big role. A company, simply by putting up a web page, in a sense, has the capability or the potential to become a multinational firm. Now, I want to emphasize today the role of resources and capabilities. And again, young, small companies are characterized by relatively scarce, limited resources compared to large companies, especially in terms of financial, human, and tangible resources. But by the same token, my research has shown that young companies, small companies, despite these limited traditional resources, are able to leverage particular types of capabilities that allow them to succeed in international business. And so let's talk for just a moment about resources and capabilities. Resources are the stock of assets and other factors that the company controls, things like capital and equipment and labor that allow it to achieve its objectives. And we know from business research that companies have to have the right resources in place in order to attain competitive advantages, in order to succeed ultimately. Now, we also know from business research that the most useful resources are valuable, meaning that they perform some useful purpose within the firm, allowing it to create products that are in demand by consumers, for example. We also know that the most useful resources are relatively rare. In other words, they're not widely available to all companies within the economy, and they're also relatively hard for other companies to imitate. However, the reality is the problem with resources is that, in point of fact, resources often are not very rare, and oftentimes they are not very difficult for other companies to imitate. And so therefore, how does particularly a young, small company with limited resources already succeed in international business? And I think the answer is capabilities. Capabilities are the strategies and the tactics and the other processes that companies develop over time that they employ to manage and develop the right resources. And the thing to know about capabilities is that they tend to be relatively idiosyncratic, meaning specific to each company, because capabilities tend to develop within each firm, within the context of a relatively unique structure of managerial talent, managerial know-how, company experience, activities in particular types of markets and domains and so forth. So capabilities are very important, and I argue capabilities are particularly important to SMEs and born global firms, and also to companies that are doing business internationally, particularly in complex markets. So you have to have the right capabilities in place in order to succeed as a young, small company in international business. And within the theoretical domain of business, there are some important perspectives, one of which is the resource-based view of the firm, which is well known to a lot of business scholars. And it basically is a pretty well-developed theoretical perspective which describes the role of resources in the firm and how they are very important to the success of the firm. And resources, according to this perspective, again, the right combination of resources managed appropriately give rise to specialized knowledge, which in turn gives rise to particular types of capabilities that really benefit the firm. And also, we have another perspective in business known as the capabilities view, or sometimes the dynamic capabilities view, which, again, sort of systematically describes how capabilities are critical to the performance of companies and how they are particularly important to companies in sort of rapidly evolving business environments, or environments where the firm needs to leverage certain types of specialized resources and capabilities in order to perform well. And there's been a lot of research done in the business domain, particularly in the management field, on the critical role of capabilities in not just international business, but in the general performance of the firm. Now, I should also mention that the phenomenon of born global firms in particular has given rise in the last decade or so to a relatively new field in business. And this field is called international entrepreneurship. And I think it's particularly relevant to the business school here because international entrepreneurship combines two important fields of scholarship in business, international business and entrepreneurship, as the name implies. And it really relates to this notion that there are companies today, young, new companies, especially born globals, that are able to perform effectively and efficiently in international business. So it's a very interesting, relatively new field with, as with many new fields, it has a lot of areas that remain to be explored and that are likely to be quite fruitful for research going forward. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of my major studies today. The first one is on international business competence, and as this relates to international SMEs. I didn't skip a slide, did I? No. Okay. So anyway, essentially, I went out and collected, in the course of doing my research, I, of course, do my literature review, and I've done a number of case studies on international SMEs. And then I went out and collected a bunch of data directly from a number of SMEs doing international business, and with some constraints that they have to be generating at least a quarter of their revenue from foreign markets. And it's very common in business research to do survey-based studies, and it's sort of in the realm of what we call confirmatory research, which usually comes in subsequent to exploratory research. But anyway, to get a better understanding of how contemporary companies, especially international SMEs, are able to succeed in international business. So in my survey, in this survey, I received 228 responses from 228 companies, and you can see that these firms had an average of about 273 employees, which is well within the realm of the definition of an SME, and we're generating a very substantial proportion of their total revenues from foreign sales, about 1/3. And then we developed this model of a construct that we call international business competence. And the goal was to try to understand the antecedents of superior international business performance of the small and medium-sized enterprise. And in the course of doing exploratory research, we uncovered these 4 constructs, which I will describe in turn, as important antecedents to international business performance of these firms. So the first one is international entrepreneurship. This is a very interesting, again, very construct that's very relevant to the research that's done and the focus of the Gustafson Business School. And it describes the tendency of a company to sort of pursue proactively and aggressively and innovatively opportunities in foreign markets, and then skillfully leverage its resources, its capabilities in a, well, this is in and of itself is a capability to leverage its resources in a way to ensure, in a very proactive manner though, to ensure success abroad. The second major construct is what we call international marketing competence. And marketing in business really refers to activities in the firm related to developing products, pricing those products, distributing those products, and communicating those products, marketing communications through activities like advertising. And we found that the most successful international SMEs were ones that were also had a high level of prowess in this competence as well. International innovativeness refers to the ability of the firm to devise novel solutions to the challenges that confront the firm in foreign markets. And innovativeness is really important to any company. It's well recognized now in the literature and in reality that the most successful firms also happen to be the most innovative firms, whether it's innovation applied to developing new products or innovation applied to developing new methods for doing business. And this is particularly important in foreign markets, which are often characterized by a high level of complexity. And so the firm has to often come up with sort of different or new business models that will allow it to succeed. And then the last construct here is what we refer to as market orientation. And market orientation is the notion of the firm being sort of proactive about going into the marketplace, doing market research, finding out, gathering relevant information about the characteristics of the market and how to do business in the market, and then internalizing that information inside the firm and translating it into strategies and tactics. And so this is the structural equations model that we looked at and basically developed 4 major hypotheses and looked at the role of these 4 constructs on 4 major performance parameters of the firm: market share and sales growth and profitability primarily. And it's very common in business research to, when you're doing survey-based research, you need to kind of confirm what we call the construct validity of constructs that you're investigating, make sure that you're actually measuring what you intend to measure, and so forth. And then, so we went through a series of what we call confirmatory factor analyses and established the reliability and validity of the constructs, and then estimated our model, and these are sort of the esoteric details of the analyses, and essentially concluded, found support for the importance of all of those 4 constructs in the international success of SMEs. And we found that, in particular, international market orientation and international entrepreneurship seem to be especially influential in the international performance of SMEs and foreign global firms. The research, I think, is useful because SMEs, as I've said, constitute the vast majority of companies in the world. They have been relatively little studied in the past. And the reality is that international business will be more and more, I don't know when I say the word dominated, but that we will see a much greater and greater presence of SMEs and international business going forward. And so in a sense, it's a very optimistic and democratic perspective on international business, because again, it implies that any company, despite its size or age, can be successful today in the world economy, and much of the success derives from the role of these sort of important antecedent orientations and capabilities. And I think it also has relevance to the ultimate success of SMEs in Japan's economy, which play an extremely important role there. And these are just some of my appendix information on how I measured these specific constructs. You can see that we had a lot of items to rigorously measure each of the constructs in the study. Now, just quickly, I'll talk about a second study that was specifically on foreign global firms. We had a similar type of approach, an exploratory phase, a confirmatory phase involving interviews and case studies of typical foreign global firms, and then a survey to confirm the findings that we uncovered in the exploratory phase. And then we developed this model here and found that, again, international entrepreneurial orientation, marketing orientation, as well as having a strong technological orientation or competence, especially as that relates to international markets, possession of relatively unique products or distinctive products that sort of differentiate a firm from competitors, a focus on quality, a focus on offering quality offerings, products, and also very important for SMEs and foreign global firms is the skill with which the firm leverages foreign partners, foreign intermediaries, such as distributors. Historically, large multinational firms internationalize via foreign direct investment, which means that they tend to own their own value chain, their own distribution channel, etc., in foreign markets. But because of their limited resources, SMEs more often than not do not internationalize via foreign direct investment. Because FDI is a very expensive internationalization mode. They tend to internationalize via exporting, which is it's a much more straightforward internationalization strategy, but it involves finding and leveraging the talents of partners, of intermediaries, and other such firms in foreign markets. And we find that, in fact, it's important for SMEs and foreign globals that succeed internationally to have a certain amount of prowess in being able to partner with foreign intermediaries. So most of these hypotheses in this model were supported. The gray lines here show the two hypotheses, the links here that were not supported. But generally speaking, this model was largely supported. And so I think that my research has been able to shed some light on what I think is a very important topic. I mean, I'm biased, but the notion that, first of all, the notion that international business is much more democratic in a sense today than ever before. We have many more companies, smaller companies doing international business, and historically we have not understood the important antecedents to their success, and hopefully my research has shed some light on the success of these companies. And these are some of the publications that have resulted from my research. Kind of the first, I can say, significant one was on the Foreign Global Firm, which appeared in the Journal of International Business Studies, and then other research in that realm, and then more broad-based research on international SMEs, and kind of going up through the present day. And so I think I'll stop there and we'll